Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady and today I will be talking about the big FAQ Games Workshop released yesterday, featuring a bunch of changes that will drastically change the way competitive and even casual games will be played. There was some normal FAQ stuff in it since it is titled the big FAQ, but the big part of this release was the new rules errata and the new beta rules. I'm going to go over all of the rules that I think are important, and I will not be covering any army specific changes since there are a ton to mention. I am only going to discuss the rulebook errata changes and how they will affect the way that the game is played. First, I will discuss the rules that are fully implemented into the game, and then I will talk about the new beta rules. So let's not waste any time and let's just jump right into it. So the first big change is that the old beta rules are now part of the game. So consecutive smites make smite go up in warp charge value. So the first smite is warp charge 5, the next smite is warp charge 6, and the next is warp charge 7, and so on. This hurts minor smite spam, but absolutely kills full-on smite spam. But don't worry, you Grey Knights and Thousand Sons players, the rule states that units with the Brotherhood of Sorcerers and Brotherhood of Psykers rule are exempt from this change, so Grey Knights and Thousand Sons can still cast multiple smites with no penalty. I like this change for the game because Smite just felt too easy to get off multiple times, and with some armies being able to bring 6 or more Psykers very easily, it was very strong against elite units like Terminators or Vehicles, and it could delete 1 to 3 units off the board if the rolls were good enough. Mortal wounds are good for the game, but not in mass. You want to have player interaction in this game, but mortal wounds are the least interactive thing about this game. Normally, when player 1 damages player 2 gets to roll a dice for a save after player 1 rolled dice to hit and wound. This is player interaction. When player 1 does mortal wounds to player 2 just picks up his models. Zero player interaction. Sure, you can argue that player 2 gets denials, so there's that interaction, but player 2 might be playing a Psykerless army like Necrons or Dark Eldar. In that case, they just have to take it. So now it's only reliable to get 2 to 3, maybe even 4 smites off unless you're Thousand Sons or Grey Knights, which means people will actually be using the army dedicated spells now with a purpose of doing actual spells instead of just smiting all the time. Overall, I think this is a great change for the game and I'm glad that it was finally implemented. The other beta rule that has now been fully implemented is that characters with less than 10 wounds cannot be targeted unless they are the closest model and visible to the shooter. So that means you can block for a character with models that are hidden as long as they measure closer to the shooting unit. This isn't too big of a change, but it needed to be addressed because of some of the exploits that were being used. I've heard horror stories of people using 2 tanks to block line of sight from the enemy units that were stopping you from shooting the character in order to create a firing path to that character, meaning you could have a Devastator squad light up a character from across the map if you cut off the line of sight properly. Another thing I heard of people doing was using weapons that don't lead line of sight, like basilisks, to essentially snipe characters. There was never an FAQ on it to my knowledge, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially, because the basilisk didn't need line of sight, if it didn't see any models because it was behind a wall, and it could target characters because there was no visible unit between the basilisk and the basilisk would just launch and bombard characters even though there was stuff in between the basilisk and the character, just because they didn't see anything. As you can imagine, this was really dumb and needed to be changed. And I never mentioned these things in videos because I felt they were exploits and I didn't want to make them more known to the community for fear of people using them more often. Another part of this new rule is that characters no longer block for other characters. So if you have 3 Calexis assassins, they do not block for each other with the character rule anymore. Only non-characters can block for characters. Again, this is a nice change because you can now split fire on close characters instead of having to overkill one just to get to the next one. There are other issues that this rule solves, but those are the big ones and the only ones that I'm going to get into, otherwise this video will take too long. Overall, I think these changes were actually needed even more than the Smite change, and I'm glad Games Workshop implemented them. The third change that was implemented is that battalion detachments now get you 5 command points instead of 3, and brigade detachments get you 12 command points instead of 9. At first, my initial reaction to this was very negative, and I thought it would break the game, and in some instances, it kind of does, which I'll talk about later. So Games Workshop's reasoning was that elite armies were having a hard time gaining enough command points to use stratagems more than once each. So Games Workshop made it so that elite lists can get a couple extra command points to have some fun with. Seems alright so far, but this means that a lot of competitive armies now will have 18 command points from 3 battalions, or 14 command points from 2 battalions, and an Outrider, Spearhead, Vanguard, or Supreme Command Detachment. This is a lot of command points to spend on stuff multiple times, essentially taking away a lot of the strategy used in deciding which stratagems to use, because now instead of doing your combo once or twice, you can now do it 3 or 4 times. For example, remember the new Drukhari stratagem that for 3 command points you can deny an opponent's stratagem on a 2+? That shit can be used 6 times in a game now if the Drukhari player brings 3 battalions and spends all of their points on that. But assume they aren't going to spend all of their command points on that one stratagem. Realistically, they will deny you 3 to 4 times with it and have 6 to 9 command points left over for other stratagems. This seems a bit much to me. Originally, when I saw the Blackheart stratagem, I figured it was going to be a once or twice a game thing, making you have to tactically decide when is the most optimal time to use it. Now you just get 3 or 4 or even 6 denies. This is just my initial reaction though, and maybe things won't be as bad as I think they will be. I have to do some playtesting to figure this out, but my initial reaction is that it takes a lot of the strategy with stratagems away and gives way too many for certain lists to use. On the other hand though, more stratagems does equal more fun for the most part, because now you get to actually use all of your combos multiple times instead of just once. So for casual players, I can see this being a great change, because that's one of the funnest part of Warhammer 40k 8th edition, is being able to use stratagems and combos and stuff like that. So I can see why they did it. Just when thinking about strictly competitive play, I think some people might abuse it, but with how many changes and how much the game has changed with Games Workshop, I'm sure if these are issues, they will be addressed in the future, so I'm not too worried about it. Overall, I think this is a good change, but I kind of think it's a bad change. But again, I'll have to do some playtesting in order to see how I truly feel about it. So I guess I might make an updated video after some testing to let you guys know if my opinion has changed. But for now, those are what my thoughts are on the battalion and brigade changes and how many command points you will get. Again, I'll update it in the future, but for now, that's how I feel about it. The last change I'm going to talk about before we get into the beta rules is another rule that is now implemented, and it's the new army list restrictions when it comes to spam. You can now only bring 3 of each datasheet in your entire army. This doesn't mean 3 of each datasheet per detachment, it means 3 for your whole army. So spam as we knew it is now dead. Only 3 Hive Tyrants are allowed. Only 3 Devastator Squads are allowed. Only 3 Fire Raptors are allowed. So again, spam is dead, for the most part. I found some loopholes and I will go over them after this particular discussion. So troops and dedicated transports are exempt from this change, so troops and transports are still spammable. So I can see spam still existing, just in a new form. This change upset a lot of people, even people who aren't necessarily competitive, because a lot of people have 4 or 5 of the same unit, not just because maybe they're strong, but just maybe because they like the unit. Personally, I love Dreadnoughts, which is why I have 4 of them. Sure, they are strong in my list, but I genuinely just like the models. Also, I have 6 units of 5 Fleshhounds. So now, unless I want to use 10-man units, 15 of my Fleshhounds are essentially useless now. There are a lot of people that this new rule will affect, and it sucks for them, but I think it's a good change going forward. But I do think some things need to be addressed, but I will discuss that in a minute. Now you will see quote-unquote fluffy armies on the table instead of 10 Plague Burst crawlers as the entire army. And I think that's great for the game overall, because most people didn't enjoy spam anyways. And from what I've seen, this change won't affect most of the competitive armies at all, because most competitive lists that were doing well weren't going overboard on spam anyways. My list only changes by having to take out 1 Dreadnought, and I'm pretty sure most of the lists from the top 8 at the last LVO wouldn't have been greatly affected by this either. It just promotes more unit diversity for the most part of the game, and armies will look much better because of it. So overall, I think this is a good change to the game, and I can't wait to see how it shakes up the meta, even though I don't think this change is as big as some of the others. So before I get into the new beta rules, let's talk about how to quote-unquote break the game with these new rules and how spam is still possible. So troops and dedicated transports still have no limitations on them, so you can spam troops and transports. This means stuff like Drukhari can still spam Kabalite Warriors and Venoms, Guard can still spam Infantry and Taurox Primes, Space Marines can still spam Scouts and Razorbacks, even though we haven't really seen much of that lately, but it might actually come back into the meta with these new changes, especially with the changes to battalions and how they give more command points, so I can see most competitive lists running at least 2 battalions to farm up those command points. You can still have multiple units that start as one unit but break into separate units. For example, Leman Russes. Sure, you're only allowed 3 quote-unquote units, but you can have multiple tanks in one unit, meaning you can still bring 9 Leman Russes if you really want to. Because again, you would have 3 Leman Russes in one unit, and then because of the rules on their data sheet, they separate into their own units once the game starts, so essentially you'll still have 9 different units on the board once the game actually begins. Another thing I noticed is that you can still bring 11 Demon Princes in a list, because you can bring a battalion of Chaos Space Marines, a battalion of Demons, and a Supreme Command detachment of Death Guard or Thousand Suns, because each Demon Prince from each one of those factions has a different data sheet. So again, this doesn't necessarily kill all of spam, it just kills certain spam like Hive Tyrant spam or Assassin spam and things like that. So going forward, I can still see spam being prevalent, it's just a new type of spam now. So like I've explained to people back in the day who really wanted a change like this to happen, it's really a pick your poison type change, because sure, we've killed some spam, but now new spam is going to arise from it. Now for the new beta rules. So the first beta rule changes the way tactical reserves work. So currently the way reserves work in match play is that for every 1 unit you have on the board, you can have 1 unit in reserves, or in deep strike, whatever you guys want to call it. And when your reserves come into play, they can land anywhere on the board as long as they are more than 9 inches away from all enemy models. The new proposed changes to this rule is that you now have to add up all of the power level of the units in reserve and the units on the table. And the units on the table must have an equal or higher combined power level than the units in reserve. This absolutely kills some lists like my current Grey Knight list. If you guys watch my Grey Knight bat reps, you will see that I use 3 strike squads on the board to be able to put my 2 Nemesis Grandmasters and 10 Paladins in Deep Strike Reserve. With this change, this will no longer be possible, because the combined power level of the units in reserve is much greater than the combined power level of my strike squads. This stops people from hiding most of their heavy hitters in reserve while only having chaff units on the board for turn 1, kind of like my Grey Knight example. This isn't the only change to this rule either. The other proposed change to the way reserves work is that if you want to deep strike a unit on turn 1, it has to be in your own deployment zone. If you want to deep strike the old way, or the way we're used to, you can only do that on turn 2 or 3. This stops deep striking Alpha Strike armies from blowing away the opponent in one turn, so at least both players get to play around with most of their army before turn 2 arrives. This change hurts Alpha Strike shooting armies like Hive Tyrants, but doesn't really affect close combat deep striking units like Bloodletter Bombs or Blood Angels. And I know this statement is going to upset a lot of Blood Angel players, because I know a lot of Blood Angel players are upset about this change, but hear me out on this one. Usually on turn 1 and or turn 2, you want to be shooting away the screen to make way for your deep striking assault units to charge the juicy targets that the screen was protecting. Do you really want all of your death company to be charging scouts and conscripts and cultists on turn 1 so they basically don't trade out well? Or would you rather shoot down the cultists and conscripts and all that stuff, so that way your death company can charge the tanks that are behind, because they're definitely good at hurting tanks because of the Red Thirst rule? So usually, as from what I've seen from playing Blood Angel armies, and mind you, I'm not the best Blood Angel player in the world, my only bat rep playing Blood Angels proves this, but from what I've discovered, you want to shoot down the screen on turn 1 anyways. Especially in my own Chaos list, I bring a blob of 30 Bloodletters, and I've noticed out of the 7 or 8 games I've played with them, that I almost never bring the Bloodletters in on turn 1, because I use my turn 1 to try to annihilate the enemy screen so that my Bloodletters can actually charge the Devastators, or charge the tanks, or charge whatever it is that is actually causing the problem and not just charging a screen. This change also does hurt a few combos as well, like the Alpha Legion infiltrating cultists. Sure, the cultists and their stratagem are unaffected because it's not deep striking, but the Chaos Lord and Sorcerer with Jump Pack that you wanted to bring in to buff them can't really do so anymore, at least not on turn 1, and by turn 2 your cultist blob's probably going to be dead anyways, or is going to have teleported across the map because of Tide of Traitors, which has also been changed, but again, I'm not talking about army specific changes, I'm just talking about the rules changes in this video. So this just means for combos like that, you have to spend another 2 command points to infiltrate those characters alongside the cultists if you want them to tag along. But with the mass amount of command points everyone will be getting, I don't think this is going to be too big of an issue. Overall, I think this is a good change for the game, since anything that limits alpha strikes is always good. It gives both players more time to play with their minis instead of losing the game on turn 1 due to a deep striking alpha strike. And it doesn't necessarily hurt assault armies as much as a lot of you Blood Angel players think it will, because, like I said, you want to use your turn 1 to shoot the screen down so your charges can actually be meaningful, instead of just killing cultists or guardsmen or scouts. The second beta rule, and the last thing I will discuss in this video, is the new rule called Battle Brothers. Essentially, the rule states that a detachment can no longer use the words Chaos, Imperium, Inari, Eldari, or Tyranids, meaning that soup detachments are now dead. This is good, but also a bad change in my opinion, because I don't think soup detachments were that big of a deal, because all of the rules and bonuses you lose for grouping stuff together kind of made it like a fair trade-off. Now you won't see Supreme Command detachments anymore with Celestine and Assassins and Greyfax, and you won't see some other things too that actually weren't that bad for the game in my own opinion. You can still make soup armies, so you have one detachment of demons with a separate detachment of Chaos Space Marines, so this change doesn't necessarily hurt me or my playstyle because I always used regular detachments but had the Chaos Army, which is still allowed. This is just going to make a lot of people happy, because people hated the idea of soup detachments because they weren't necessarily fluffy, but this is going to change competitive a lot, and I already see a lot of complaints in my Patreon Discord because of the people who have Celestine or Greyfax and can no longer group them together in a Supreme Command. Kind of like the new rule that only allows 3 of each unit, a lot of people are going to have models they spent money and time on that they aren't even allowed to use now, which really sucks. But I do think this is healthy for the game overall, and it will make the game more interesting. But just like the changes to how many units you're allowed to use now, I wish they made these changes sooner before new players bought a bunch of stuff that is now useless. Overall, I like this change, but again, I just wish Games Workshop did it a little bit sooner, but I am glad that they did it now rather than later. The sooner the better type thing, right? You might as well do it now. Sure, some people are going to be upset, but it stops you from upsetting more people in the future that went out and bought 7 Hive Tyrants or whatever it is that they wanted to do. So that's going to be it for the big FAQ coverage, and I'm curious as to what you guys think. So let me know down in the comments, because I'm genuinely interested in what you guys have to say about this stuff. So with that said, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. And if you've already subscribed but would like to help out the channel even further, you can do so on Patreon. A pledge of $4 gets you exclusive access to the Almost Pro Gaming Discord channel, where you can talk with either myself or other Almost Pro gamers and get help with lists or tactics or really anything Warhammer 40k related. In fact, we had a great discussion about this update yesterday after it was released. We talked for at least a couple of hours about it, and it was a great time. I had a lot of fun. Also, thanks to all of my current patrons. Without you guys, this channel wouldn't be possible, so thank you all very much. I appreciate every single one of you. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Happy wargaming.